Florida is known as a paradise of sun and sand, but beyond the beaches, there's a landscape of deep swamps and endless highways where secrets go to die. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing disappearances in Florida history. These cases defy logic and fuel nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please take a second to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel. Now, watch your step, and let's get into it. Orlando, Florida, January 24th, 2006. Let me paint you a picture. It's not the Orlando of theme parks and tourist traps. This is the other Orlando, the one where young professionals live in shiny new condos with gated entries and granite countertops. The kind of place where you're supposed to feel safe, where bad things don't happen. The Mosaic at Millenia, that's the name of the complex. Sounds nice, right? Upscale, modern. It was marketed as luxury living for the up-and-coming. But here's what the brochures didn't tell you. In early 2006, the place was a construction site wearing a mask of normalcy. The complex was in transition, converting from rental apartments to privately owned condos, which meant chaos, workers everywhere, contractors you didn't recognize, painters living in empty units. Security gates propped open so dump trucks could roll through without stopping. It was a fishbowl pretending to be a fortress, and that's where Jennifer Kess lived. She was 24, finance manager at a timeshare company, the kind of person who had her life figured out at an age when most people are still stumbling through their 20s. She was organized, punctual. She called her parents every single day. She called her boyfriend, Rob, every single night before bed. She was the opposite of spontaneous. Jennifer Kess did not deviate from her routine, which is why what happened next makes no sense. The night of January 23rd, Jennifer was home. She'd just gotten back from a vacation in St. Croix with Rob the day before. She talked to her parents. She talked to Rob at 10 p.m., the usual goodnight call. Everything was normal. She said she was tired, going to bed, and they'd talk tomorrow. Tomorrow came. Jennifer didn't call Rob in the morning. That was unusual, but not alarming yet. Maybe she overslept. Maybe her phone died. But then she didn't show up to work. Jennifer Kess was never late. Her manager tried calling, no answer. Her co-workers tried calling, straight to voicemail. By noon, her parents were driving down from Tampa. Something was wrong. They got to her condo around 3 p.m. The door was locked. They used the spare key. And here's where it gets strange. The apartment looked fine. Too fine. Her bed was made. Clothes were laid out on the bed. Her work outfit, like she'd been planning her day. Makeup on the bathroom counter. Her toothbrush was wet, or at least the sink area was damp. The shower might have been used recently. Her parents would later debate this detail, how moisture clings in Florida humidity, how long a shower stays wet. But here's what wasn't there. Jennifer. Her purse, her cell phone, her keys, her car. It looked exactly like someone who got ready for work and walked out the door. Except she never made it to work, and no one had seen her. Now, this is where it gets really strange. 2 days later, January 26th, Jennifer's car is found, her black Chevy Malibu, but not at the Mosaic. It's parked at another apartment complex called Huntington on the Green, about a mile away. The car is just sitting there, parked, locked. When police process it, they find it's been wiped down. No substantial fingerprints, no DNA on the steering wheel, her cell phone, not in the car, her purse, gone. But here's what was in the car: her iPod, a DVD player, her work briefcase. If this was a robbery, why leave the valuables? And then there's the footage. The security cameras at Huntington on the Green captured the moment someone parked Jennifer's car. The timestamp shows it's around noon on January 24th, just hours after she likely went missing. You can see a figure exit the vehicle. They walk across the parking lot, heading back in the direction of the Mosaic complex. This should be the moment the case breaks wide open. This is the abductor on camera. This is the person who took Jennifer Kess. Except you can't see their face, not because the footage is grainy, though it's not great quality, not because they're wearing a mask, but because of a fence. Let me explain this to you, because when I first heard it, I thought it had to be exaggerated. It's not. The security camera is positioned across the parking lot from where the suspect is walking. Between the camera and the walking path is a wrought iron fence, those decorative ones with vertical bars spaced every couple of feet. The camera takes a photo every 3 seconds. As the suspect walks, they pass behind this fence, and in every single frame, a fence post is perfectly positioned over their face. Think about the odds of that. The timing would have to be perfect. Their walking speed, their stride, the exact moment each photo snaps. It all has to align so that in 6 or 7 frames, their face is always hidden. It's like watching someone walk through a flip book where every page has been doctored. Some people think it's intentional, that the suspect knew about the camera, knew about the 3-second intervals and timed their walk. But that would require reconnaissance. It would mean the abductor scoped out the Huntington complex, studied the security system, practiced the timing. That's not opportunistic. That's planned. Others think it's just cosmically bad luck, the universe playing a sick joke, a statistical anomaly that destroyed the one piece of evidence that could identify Jennifer's abductor. But here's what we can see. The person is short. The FBI estimates between 5.3 and 5.5. They're wearing light-colored clothing, possibly painter's whites or khaki work clothes. They walk with a slight splay to their feet. And after they drop off the car, they walk away. Not run. Walk. Casual. Like they have every right to be there. Now let's talk about why none of this makes sense. Why bring the car back? Think about it. If you abduct someone, if you harm them, or worse, the victim's car is a massive liability. It's evidence on wheels. It connects you to the crime. The smart move is to get rid of it immediately. Drive it into a lake, torch it, strip it, leave it in a bad neighborhood where it'll get stolen and chopped. But what does Jennifer's abductor do? They drive it to an apartment complex 1 mile from the crime scene. They park it neatly. They wipe it down so there's no forensic evidence. And then they walk back toward the mosaic. Does that sound like a stranger abduction to you? A random predator who struck at a vulnerable moment? Because to me, it sounds like someone who belonged there. Someone who could blend back into the environment without raising suspicion. Which brings us to the workers. The mosaic was crawling with construction crews in early 2006. Painters, electricians, contractors, many of them were living in the empty units, off the books, no background checks. Jennifer had complained to friends about being watched, about feeling uncomfortable with the way some of the workers looked at her. She told her boyfriend one of them had been really aggressive in his attention. But here's the thing about that theory. If it was a worker, it means this person had been watching her, learning her routine, knowing when she left for work. And then, after abducting her, they had the presence of mind to drive her car to a secondary location, wipe it completely clean of forensic evidence, and walk away without being identified on camera. That's not a crime of passion. That's not a construction worker who lost control. That's calculated. So who are we dealing with? A stranger who got impossibly lucky with a fence post? A worker who turned out to be a criminal mastermind? Or someone else entirely? Someone Jennifer knew, someone who had access, someone who understood the environment well enough to use it against her. And here's another detail that haunts me. The dog. The Kessie family brought a police bloodhound named Bo to Huntington on the Green. Bo picked up a scent from Jennifer's car. And where did that scent lead? Back to the mosaic. Specifically, it led to the stairs of Jennifer's building. The dog tracked the path that the suspect walked after abandoning the car, which means the person who took Jennifer went right back to where they started, right back to the scene of the crime, and then they just disappeared into the crowd of workers, residents, strangers moving through that half-finished complex. It's been over 19 years since Jennifer Kess walked out of her apartment and vanished. In that time, investigators have tested DNA. They've re-interviewed witnesses, they've chased leads across the country. In recent years, there have been hints of progress, whispers that modern genealogical DNA techniques have narrowed the suspect pool, that the case is no longer cold. But as of now, no arrests, no body, no closure. What happened to Jennifer Kessie in those moments between her front door and her parking spot? Was she grabbed in the lot, overpowered before she could scream? Was she forced into her own car and driven away? Or did she willingly get into a vehicle with someone she recognized, someone she had no reason to fear? Here's what we know for certain. Jennifer Kess did everything right. She was careful. She was aware. She lived in a gated community with security cameras. She stayed in contact with her family. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't taking risks. She was just living her life. And someone made her disappear. What haunts me about this case isn't just the mystery. It's the proximity. Jennifer vanished from a place that looked safe, a place that felt normal, the kind of place where any of us might live. And the person who took her was caught on camera, frozen in those few frames of footage. They're right there, walking away. But we can't see their face because of a fence post, because of timing, because the universe, or something darker, made sure that the one piece of evidence that could solve this case would be just out of reach. Jennifer Kess is still out there, or the truth about what happened to her is. And somewhere, the person who walked away from that parking lot, past that fence, back toward the mosaic, they know. They've always known, and for 19 years, they've gotten away with it. Naples, Florida. When you hear that name, you probably think of pristine beaches, golf courses, and million-dollar homes. Naples is where wealthy retirees go to live out their golden years in air-conditioned comfort. It's the kind of place where the lawns are perfect, the streets are clean, and the police wave at you from their patrol cars. It's orderly, safe, civilized, which is why what I'm about to tell you feels so fundamentally wrong. Because in Naples, Florida, in this postcard of American prosperity, two men vanished into thin air. And the only connection between them is this: they both took a ride in the back of a patrol car driven by the same deputy. His name was Stephen Calkins, and after he gave them that ride, Felipe Santos and Terrence Williams were never seen again. Let me be clear about something up front. These two men didn't know each other. They moved in completely different circles. Felipe was a 23-year-old undocumented immigrant from Mexico, working construction, sending money back to his family. Terrence was a 27-year-old American citizen, a father of four who'd just moved down from Tennessee to be closer to his mother. Different lives, different worlds, but they shared the same fate. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. The person who likely knows what happened to them wore a badge. He had authority. He had the power to stop you on the road, put you in handcuffs, and decide where you went next. And for Felipe Santos and Terrence Williams, that next destination wasn't the police station. It was nowhere. Let's start with Felipe Santos, October 14th, 2003, early morning. Felipe is driving to work when he gets into a minor traffic accident at a busy intersection in North Naples. Nothing serious, a fender bender. But Felipe has a problem. He doesn't have a driver's license. He's undocumented, and he knows that any interaction with law enforcement is dangerous. Deportation is always hanging over his head like a sword. Deputy Stephen Calkins arrives at the scene. What happens next, we only know from Calkins' own account, and as you'll see, his accounts change depending on who's asking and when. According to Calkins, he told Felipe he was under arrest for driving without a license. He put Felipe in the back of his patrol car. But then, and this is where the story gets convenient, Calkins says he had a change of heart. He felt sorry for the guy. So instead of booking him, instead of following standard procedure, Calkins claims he drove Felipe to a Circle K convenience store and let him go. Just dropped him off. No arrest, no paperwork, just a friendly cop doing a favor. Felipe Santos was never seen again. His family reported him missing. But here's the reality of being undocumented in America. When you disappear, people assume you went back to Mexico. The investigation was minimal. Felipe was just another name on a missing persons list that no one really looked at too hard. Until 3 months later, January 12th, 2004. Terrence Williams is driving his 1984 Cadillac through Naples. The car is a bit of a beater. Terrence's friends joked about it, but it runs. He's on his way to a party, or maybe to work. Accounts vary. What's not in dispute is this: his car breaks down or gets pulled over near the Naples Memorial Garden Cemetery. And guess who responds? Deputy Stephen Calkins. Now, unlike with Felipe Santos, we have witnesses for this one. Cemetery workers see the whole thing. They watch as Calkins pulls Terrence over, pats him down, and places him in the back of the patrol car. They see Calkins move Terrence's Cadillac off the road into a parking spot, and then they see him drive away, with Terrence in the back. Terrence Williams was never seen again. But here's where it gets interesting. When Terrence's family starts asking questions, when his mother Marcia demands to know where her son is, Calkins denies everything. He says he never met Terrence Williams. He files a report claiming he found the Cadillac abandoned at 12:15 p.m., just a random abandoned car on the side of the road. He called for a tow. That's it. He never saw the driver. Except that's a lie. And we know it's a lie because of the dispatch records. At 1:12 p.m., almost an hour after Calkins claims he found the abandoned car, he radios dispatch asking for a background check on Terrence Williams. And here's the detail that destroys his story. Calkins provides a specific birth date. Not the correct one. It's a birth date Terrence had used in a previous arrest, which means Calkins didn't just see Terrence. He talked to him, he interrogated him, he ran his information. When confronted with this evidence, Calkins changes his story. Now he admits, okay, yes, he did encounter Terrence Williams, he did put him in the patrol car. But just like Felipe Santos, Calkins says he felt bad for the guy. He was late for work. So instead of arresting him for driving without insurance and an expired registration, Calkins drove him to, wait for it, a Circle K. The same story, the same Circle K defense. 2 men, 3 months apart, both placed in the back of Stephen Calkins's patrol car, both dropped off at a Circle K, both vanished without a trace. Let's talk about why this makes absolutely no sense. First, the procedure. Police don't work this way. When you arrest someone, when you put handcuffs on them and place them in the back of your patrol car, you book them. You take them to the station. You process them. There's paperwork. There's a system. You don't just change your mind halfway there and drop them at a gas station like you're their Uber driver. And if you really did let someone go out of the kindness of your heart, you'd document it. You'd note it in your report. You'd cover yourself because any deviation from procedure can get you in trouble. But Calkins documented nothing. No report about giving Felipe a ride. No notation about dropping Terrence at Circle K. In fact, he actively lied about the Terrence Williams encounter until the dispatch tapes proved he was lying. So why lie? Why claim you never met someone when there's a paper trail proving you did? Why fabricate a story about an abandoned car when witnesses saw you pull the driver over? You lie when you have something to hide. Now let's talk about the Circle K. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from every Circle K in the area. They checked the dates, they checked the times, and guess what? Neither Felipe Santos nor Terrence Williams appears on any of that footage. Calkins's patrol car doesn't appear on any of that footage. The Circle K story is fiction, but it gets worse. Calkins claimed he called the Circle K to check on the men after he dropped them off. Phone records show no such calls were ever made. And here's the detail that should make your skin crawl. Calkins took 3 polygraph tests about these disappearances. 3. The first was inconclusive. The second indicated he was being truthful. The third indicated deception. He was fired from the Collier County Sheriff's Office, not for murder, not even for negligence, but for lying during an internal investigation. He was never charged with a crime. Now let's address the elephant in the room. The coincidence. What are the odds that the same deputy in the same county encounters 2 completely unrelated men 3 months apart, puts both of them in his patrol car, and both of them disappear forever? What are the odds that both times his explanation is identical? I dropped him at a Circle K, even though there's no evidence either man was ever at a Circle K? What are the odds that in a place like Naples, where people don't just vanish, 2 men evaporate within weeks of encountering the same cop? Coincidence or pattern? Let me give you another detail that haunts this case. When Terrence Williams's car was found, investigators discovered something odd. The key to the Cadillac was on the ground near where it was parked. Think about that. If Terrence abandoned his car, if he walked away from it voluntarily, why would he leave the key on the ground? You'd pocket it. You'd toss it in the bushes if you didn't want it found. You wouldn't just drop it neatly on the pavement. But if someone else moved that car, if someone else parked it there and needed to get rid of the key, dropping it makes sense. It's staging. It's making the scene look like an abandonment. And here's what makes this even more sinister. Cemetery workers remember seeing Calkins move the Cadillac. They saw him reposition it, moving it from one spot to another. When asked why, Calkins said it was blocking traffic and needed to be towed. But the workers said the car wasn't blocking anything until Calkins moved it to block traffic. He moved the car to justify having it towed. He created the reason to get rid of it. Why would you do that unless you were trying to erase evidence of an encounter you didn't want on record? There's one more detail I need to mention, and it's chilling. In the dispatch recordings, when Calkins calls in the abandoned Cadillac, he makes a joke. He refers to it as a homey Cadillac and laughs about it being a piece of junk. And then he says this to the dispatcher: "Maybe he's out there in the cemetery. He'll come back and his car will be gone." At the time, it probably sounded like dark humor, a cop making a flippant remark, but in hindsight, that line reads like something else entirely. Maybe he's out there in the cemetery. Was that a joke? Or was it a confession wrapped in sarcasm? It's been over 20 years since Felipe Santos disappeared, nearly 20 since Terrence Williams vanished. Their families have fought for answers. They've held vigils. They've hired lawyers. Marcia Williams, Terrence's mother, even filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Stephen Calkins. In 2020, the case went to arbitration. And in a decision that can only be described as a gut punch, the arbitrator ruled in favor of Calkins. The case was dismissed, and then, adding insult to devastating injury, Marcia Williams was ordered to pay Calkins's legal fees. Over $5,000. Think about that. A mother who lost her son, who spent 2 decades searching for answers, had to pay the man she believes killed him. Stephen Calkins has never been charged. He lives somewhere in the United States, free. He's denied any wrongdoing. He maintains that he simply gave 2 men rides and dropped them off, and what happened after that is not his responsibility. But here's what we know. 2 men got into the back of his patrol car. 2 men were never seen again. 2 men's families have spent decades wondering where their sons are buried, if they're buried, if there's anything left to find. And the only person who knows the truth is the man who wore the badge. This case terrifies me for a very specific reason. We're taught from childhood that if you're in trouble, you find a police officer. You trust the badge. You believe that the person in that uniform is there to protect you. But what happens when the person behind the badge is the danger? What happens when the last person you see before you vanish is the one you called for help? In Naples, Florida, in 2003 and 2004, for Felipe Santos and Terrence Williams, the answer to that question is the same. Nothing happens. You just disappear. And the person who made you disappear goes home, files a report, and tells everyone you got out at a Circle K. Stephen Calkins knows what happened, whether it was murder, whether it was something else, an accident that spiraled, a moment of rage, a calculated act. He knows. And he's never told. Somewhere in Florida, maybe in the Everglades where alligators erase evidence in days, maybe in a forgotten patch of swamp, Felipe and Terrence might still be out there. Or maybe, like Calkins joked, they're out there in the cemetery, waiting to be found, waiting for someone to care enough to look. Satsuma, Florida, February 9th, 2009. When people think of Florida, they picture Miami Beach, Disney World, palm trees and sunshine. But there's another Florida, a Florida most tourists never see. It's the Florida of dirt roads and double wides, of dollar stores and churches with hand-painted signs. It's rural, it's poor, and it's a world away from the postcards. Satsuma is that Florida. It's a tiny, unincorporated community in Putnam County, about an hour south of Jacksonville. Population, less than 500. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, but not necessarily in a good way. It sits on the edge of the St. Johns River, surrounded by swamps and scrub forest. Mobile homes are scattered along the roads like forgotten toys. And on the night of February 9th, 2009, in one of those mobile homes, a little girl vanished. Her name was Hallie Ann Marie Cummings. She was 5 years old, blonde hair, brown eyes, 39 pounds. She had Turner syndrome, a genetic condition that would have required medical attention throughout her life. She was in kindergarten. She was shy but sweet. Her father called her his princess. Hallie lived in a single-wide trailer in a mobile home park called Hermit's Cove with her father, Ronald Cummings, her younger brother, Junior, who was 3, and her father's girlfriend, Misty Croslin. Let me tell you about Misty. She was 17 years old. 17. Ronald was 25. They'd been together less than a year, and their relationship was volatile. Lots of fighting, breaking up, getting back together. Misty was essentially a teenager playing house with 2 young kids who weren't hers. And on the night Hallie disappeared, Ronald was at work. He had the night shift at a PDM bridge job site working as a crane operator, which meant Misty, this 17-year-old girl, was alone in the trailer with Hallie and Junior. That night was cold for Florida. Temperatures dropped into the low 40s. A heavy mist settled over the area, the kind that muffles sound and makes everything feel isolated. Inside the trailer, it was quiet, dark. And somewhere in those dark, quiet hours, Hallie Cummings disappeared. Let's walk through what Misty Croslin says happened. And I say says because her story has changed more times than I can count. According to Misty, she put Hallie and Junior to bed around 8 p.m. They slept in the same bedroom where Misty also slept, Hallie in her own bed, Junior in his, and Misty presumably in another bed or on a couch in the same room. The trailer was small. You could hear everything. Misty says she went to sleep around 10 p.m. The back door was locked. Everything was normal. And then, around 3:08 a.m., Misty woke up. She says she got up to use the bathroom. And when she came back, this is crucial, she noticed something wrong. Hallie's bed was empty. Misty checked the trailer. She looked in the other rooms. She looked in the bathroom. No Hallie. And then she saw the back door. It was wide open, and propped against it, holding it open, was a cinder block. Misty panicked. She checked outside, calling Hallie's name. Nothing. She called Ronald at work. Ronald raced home. He arrived at the trailer around 3:27 a.m. and immediately called 911. You can hear the raw terror in his voice on that call. He's screaming, sobbing, demanding the police come now. "Someone stole my child," he yells. By 4 a.m., the Putnam County Sheriff's Office had launched a massive search. An Amber Alert was issued. Volunteers combed the woods and swamps around Satsuma. Bloodhounds were brought in. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead. They found nothing. No footprints leading away from the trailer. No signs of a struggle. No discarded clothing. No witnesses who saw anyone carrying a child. No vehicle speeding away in the night. Just an empty bed, an open door, and a cinder block. Now, this is where it gets strange, because the story Misty tells doesn't make sense, not logically, not physically, not in any way that holds up under scrutiny. Let's start with the cinder block. Misty says the back door was propped open with it. Think about that for a second. If a stranger breaks into a trailer to kidnap a child, they want to be fast and silent. They want to get in, grab the kid, and get out before anyone wakes up. Every second they're inside increases the risk of being caught. So why? Why on earth would they stop on their way out to prop the door open with a cinder block? That makes no sense. Propping a door open is something you do when you need to keep the path clear because you're coming back, or because you're carrying something heavy and need both hands free and don't want the door swinging shut behind you. But if you're kidnapping a 39-pound child, you don't need both hands free to carry her. She's small, and you certainly don't need to keep the door open for a return trip. So who props a door as he open? Someone who lives there, someone who's staging a scene, someone who wants it to look like a break-in. Now, let's talk about the logistics. Misty says she was sleeping in the same room as Hallie and Junior. The trailer is small, maybe 700 square feet. It's a metal box. Sound carries. An intruder would have to, 1, open the back door, which Misty says was locked, so they'd have to pick it or force it. 2, navigate through the dark trailer without knocking anything over. 3, enter the bedroom where 3 people are sleeping. 4, pick up a 5-year-old child from her bed without waking her or her 3-year-old brother sleeping inches away. 5, carry her back through the trailer and out the back door. 6. Stop to prop the door open with a cinder block. 7. Vanish into the misty night, all without making a sound, all without Hallie screaming or crying or calling for her daddy. Does that sound plausible to you? Because it doesn't to me. Especially when you consider this, Junior, the 3-year-old, was left behind. If an intruder is in that room, why take one child and not the other? Why leave a witness? Here's where Misty Crosland becomes the central problem in this case, because her story didn't stay consistent. In the first version, she was asleep. She woke up, Hallekin was gone, door was open. Simple. But then details started shifting. In one version, she and Ronald had been fighting on the phone that night. He accused her of partying while he was at work. She was upset. In another version, her cousin Joe Overstreet was at the trailer that night. She says Joe was acting weird, and later she implied he might have taken Halle's. In yet another version, one she told years later while in prison on drug charges, Misty said she saw what happened. She said she was hiding under a blanket with Junior while someone took Hallie. She said she heard Hallie screaming. Wait. So first she was asleep and woke up to find Hallie is gone. Now she was awake and hiding while someone took her? Which is it, Misty? Investigators grilled her. They polygraphed her multiple times. She failed. They hypnotized her, hoping to unlock buried memories. Nothing. Misty's story changed depending on who was asking and when, and every time it changed, it became less believable. There's another problem with the timeline. Misty says she went to sleep at 10 p.m. and woke up at 3 a.m. That's 5 hours. What happened during those 5 hours? Misty says she was asleep, but investigators found that hard to believe. Phone records showed Misty made and received calls during the evening, including calls with Ronald. Some of those calls were arguments, and here's the thing. If something happened to Hallie earlier in the night, if there was an accident or a moment of rage or something else, those 5 hours are enough time to dispose of a body. The St. Johns River is right there. The swamps are endless. A 39-pound child could be hidden in 100 different places within a short drive. Let's talk about Joe Overstreet. He's Misty's cousin. And according to later statements from Misty and other family members, Joe was at the trailer that night. Why does that matter? Because it shifts the crime from stranger abduction to family involvement. One theory, pushed by Misty's family, is that Joe took Hallie as payback for a stolen gun. Supposedly, Ronald had a gun that belonged to Joe or someone Joe knew, and Joe took Hallie to settle the score or send a message. Another theory is even darker. Joe and others harmed Hallie, either intentionally or accidentally, and then staged the scene to cover it up. Joe Overstreet was eventually questioned by police. He denied everything. He took a polygraph and, according to reports, passed it. But he was also arrested on unrelated drug charges, which tells you something about the circles this family ran in. To this day, Joe Overstreet has never been charged in connection with Hallie P's disappearance. Let me be blunt. This was not a stable household. Ronald and Misty were both involved in the local drug scene. Within a year of Hallie's disappearance, multiple people in their circle, including Ronald and Misty, were arrested on charges related to trafficking prescription pills. Some investigators believe Hallie's disappearance is tied to that world. Maybe someone took her to settle a debt. Maybe she was collateral. Maybe she witnessed something she shouldn't have and someone made sure she couldn't talk. But here's the problem with that theory. Kidnapping a child brings massive heat. Law enforcement, FBI, media, it's the kind of attention drug dealers avoid at all costs. So if this was about drugs, it was personal. Someone so angry, so reckless, that they didn't care about the consequences. It's been over 15 years since Hallie Cummings disappeared. There have been no credible sightings. No body has been found. No one has been charged. Ronald Cummings is currently serving a 15-year sentence on drug trafficking charges. He maintains he had nothing to do with his daughter's disappearance. Misty Crosland is also in prison on drug charges. Over the years, she's given multiple conflicting accounts of what happened that night, but she's never provided information that led to Hallie. And Hallie, she'd be 21 years old now, if she's alive. But most investigators don't believe she is. The evidence, or lack of it, suggests Hallie never left that trailer alive. The staging of the scene, the cinder block, the 5-hour gap, the changing stories, it all points inward, not outward. Somewhere, someone knows what happened. Maybe it's Misty, maybe it's Ronald, maybe it's Joe Overstreet or someone else in that tangled web of family and drugs and dysfunction, but no one is talking. And that's the real tragedy of this case. It's not that we don't have evidence, it's that the people who have the answers are choosing to stay silent. Whether out of fear or guilt or loyalty, they've decided that the truth isn't worth telling. So Hallie remains in that liminal space between missing and dead. Her name is still on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. Her face is still on flyers. Her case is still technically open, but deep down, everyone knows. A 5-year-old girl didn't walk out of that trailer on her own. She didn't unlock the back door, prop it open with a cinder block, and wander off into the foggy night. Someone carried her out. Someone knows where she is. And until that someone speaks, Hallie Cummings will remain what she's been for 15 years, a ghost in a trailer park, a memory in the mist, a little girl who vanished from her bed and was swallowed by silence. If you know something, if you were there, if you heard something, if guilt has been eating at you for 15 years, it's not too late. Tell the truth. Let Hallie come home. Coconut Grove, Florida, March 5th, 1974. If you don't know Coconut Grove, let me paint the picture for you. In the early 1970s, the Grove, as locals called it, was Miami's answer to Haight-Ashbury. It was bohemian, artistic, and unapologetically countercultural. Musicians played on street corners. Artists sold handmade jewelry. The smell of incense mixed with salt air from Biscayne Bay. Everyone had long hair, wore sandals, and talked about peace and love. And everyone hitchhiked. This wasn't seen as dangerous. This was community. This was how you got around if you didn't have a car. You stuck out your thumb, someone picked you up, and you trusted that the universe would take care of you. In March 1974, that trust was still intact. Amy Billig was 17 years old. She had brown hair, brown eyes, and a bright smile. She was 5'5", about 110 pounds with a distinctive appendectomy scar on her abdomen. She was artistic. She played the flute, wrote poetry. She fit perfectly into the Grove's vibe, free-spirited but not reckless. She wasn't a runaway kid or a troubled teen. She had a family who loved her. She had plans. On that sunny Tuesday afternoon, Amy had a simple mission. Meet her dad at his art gallery and borrow $2 to buy a blazer she'd seen at a local shop. $2, a blazer, a lunch with dad. The most mundane errand imaginable. She left her house around noon and started walking toward the gallery. It was about a mile away, an easy walk, but in the Florida heat, it made sense to hitch a ride. So Amy did what everyone did in the Grove. She walked a main highway near Poinciana Street, stuck out her thumb, and waited. Construction workers nearby saw her, a pretty teenage girl in a denim miniskirt and cork platform sandals, standing on the side of the road, hitchhiking. They watched her get into a car, and then Amy Billig disappeared. Let me be clear about something. Amy didn't just vanish. People saw her. Witnesses placed her at that intersection. They saw the car she got into. Accounts vary, but most describe it as a dark-colored vehicle, possibly a van or a large sedan. But no one got a license plate. No one thought anything was wrong, because this was normal. This was the Grove. People picked up hitchhikers all the time. By evening, when Amy didn't come home, her parents started to worry. By the next day, when she still hadn't shown up, they called the police, and thus began one of the longest, most agonizing missing persons cases in American history. Amy's mother, Susan Billig, sued to everyone who knew her, refused to give up. She plastered the Grove with missing person flyers. She walked the streets every day asking questions, showing Amy's photo to anyone who would look. She became a fixture in Coconut Grove, a mother whose entire existence had collapsed into a single mission: find my daughter. The police investigated. They had some leads. Amy's camera was found months later at a highway rest stop 250 miles north, near Wildwood on the Florida Turnpike. When they developed the film, most of the photos were overexposed and unusable. But one image stood out: a white van or truck parked in front of a vine-covered wall. The location was never identified. Was that the vehicle Amy got into? Was she alive when that photo was taken? Or had someone else found the camera and snapped a random shot? No one knew. And then, the phone calls started. Now, this is where the story becomes a nightmare within a nightmare. Shortly after Amy disappeared, Sue Billig received a phone call. A man's voice. He told her that Amy was alive, that she was being held by a motorcycle gang, the Outlaws, one of the most notorious outlaw biker clubs in the country. He said Amy was being used, abused, trafficked. Sue was desperate. She begged the caller for information. Where was Amy? How could she get her back? But the caller never gave her anything concrete, just vague hints, taunts, descriptions of torture that may or may not have been real. And then he'd hang up, and then he'd call again. Days later, weeks later, months later. For 21 years, this went on. 21 years of late-night phone calls. 21 years of a voice describing unspeakable things. 21 years of hope and horror tangled together, keeping Sue Billig trapped in a living hell. Let's unpack this, because there are two stories here, and they don't quite fit together. Story 1. The Stalker. In 1995, 21 years after Amy disappeared, the FBI finally traced the calls. The voice that had been tormenting Sue Billig all those years belonged to a man named Henry Johnson Blair. And here's the twist. He wasn't a biker. He wasn't a kidnapper. He was a U.S. Customs agent. Henry Johnson Blair had inserted himself into the investigation early on. He'd offered to help. He'd presented himself as someone with connections, someone who could get information. Sue trusted him. She was desperate, and he seemed like an ally. But he was the one calling her. For 2 decades, this man, this law enforcement officer, called a grieving mother in the middle of the night and described in graphic detail the torture and sexual abuse of her missing daughter. He kept her hope alive just enough that she couldn't move on, but never gave her anything real. No location, no proof, just torment. When confronted, Blair claimed he had obsessive-compulsive disorder. He said he was an alcoholic. He admitted to the calls, but insisted he didn't know what happened to Amy. He said he was just obsessed. But here's the thing. Why? What kind of psychological profile does it take to do that? To spend 21 years tormenting a mother? Not for money. He never asked for ransom. Not for attention. He stayed anonymous, just for the power, the control, the sick satisfaction of keeping someone suspended in agony. And here's another detail that makes it even more disturbing. Amy's diary was recovered early in the investigation. In it, she mentioned a man she was afraid of, a man she called Hank. Hank. Henry's nickname is Hank. Amy had written that Hank wanted to take her to South America, and guess where Henry Johnson Blair was stationed shortly after Amy's disappearance? South America. Coincidence? Or was Blair more than just a stalker? Was he involved in Amy's actual disappearance? Sue Billig believed he was. Until the day she died, she believed that the man who tormented her for 21 years was the same man who took her daughter. But Blair was never charged with kidnapping or murder, just harassment, and the case remained unsolved. Story 2. The Biker Connection. Even though Blair was a liar and a sadist, the biker theory didn't die, because there was evidence that it might be true. The Outlaws motorcycle gang was active in Coconut Grove in the 1970s. So was their rival gang, the Pagans. These weren't weekend riders with leather jackets. These were criminal organizations involved in drug trafficking, prostitution, and violence. And they had a history of kidnapping young women. In the 1970s, there were multiple reports of biker gangs picking up hitchhiking girls, taking them to parties, drugging them, and either trafficking them or killing them when they became liabilities. It was a grim pattern, and Amy fit the profile. Young, pretty, naive, and hitchhiking in an area where the gangs operated. Then, years later, came the deathbed confession. A man named Paul Branch, a former member of the Pagans, was dying. His widow came forward and said that before he died, Paul told her what happened to Amy Billig. According to Branch, his gang picked Amy up that day in 1974. They took her to a party. They gave her drugs, probably something laced, something heavy. And then they raped her. Multiple men. What they call a train. Amy overdosed, or maybe she didn't overdose. Maybe she was killed to keep her quiet. Either way, she died. Branch said they panicked. They took her body to the Everglades and fed it to the alligators. Now, here's why this confession is credible. Paul Branch knew about Amy's appendectomy scar. That detail had never been released to the public. It was holdback evidence, something only law enforcement and the family knew. If Branch was making the story up, how would he know about the scar? The only way he'd know is if he'd seen her body. But without remains, there's no way to confirm his story. The Everglades are vast. Alligators and time destroy everything. If Amy's body was dumped there in 1974, there's nothing left to find. So which story is true? Was Amy killed by bikers within hours of her disappearance, her body disposed of in the swamp, while Henry Johnson Blair spent 21 years torturing her mother with lies? Or was Blair more involved than he admitted? Did he take Amy? Did he traffic her to South America, just like she feared? And did he call Sue for 2 decades because he knew exactly where Amy was or what he'd done to her? Both stories are horrifying. Both are plausible. And the worst part is, we may never know which one is real, because the only people who know the truth are either dead or silent. Let me circle back to that camera for a second, because it's one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. Amy's camera was found at a rest stop on the Florida Turnpike, 250 miles north of Miami. Inside was that photo, the white van or truck in front of a vine-covered wall. Some investigators think the photo shows where Amy was held. Others think it's just a random shot taken by whoever stole or found the camera. But here's what gets me. The Turnpike runs north out of Florida toward Georgia and beyond. If Amy was trafficked, if she was moved out of state, that highway is how you do it. The camera being found there isn't random. It's a breadcrumb, a clue. But it's a breadcrumb that leads nowhere. Susan Billig died in 2005. She was 74 years old. She spent 31 years searching for her daughter. 31 years walking the streets of Coconut Grove, showing Amy's photo, following every lead, no matter how hopeless. She never found out what happened. She died not knowing if her daughter was murdered in 1974, or if she was alive somewhere, maybe still being held, maybe suffering, maybe just too afraid to come home. And for 21 of those years, Sue Billig was tortured by a man who called himself a helper, a man who wore a badge, a man who used her grief as a toy. That's the part of this case that haunts me most, not just the disappearance, though that's tragic enough. It's the cruelty that came after, the phone calls, the lies, the deliberate, calculated torment of a mother who had already lost everything. Henry Johnson Blair stole 21 years of Sue Billig's life. Even if he didn't take Amy, he took Sue. He kept her trapped in a nightmare, unable to grieve, unable to heal, unable to move forward, and he's never fully paid for that. Amy Billig was 17 years old when she stuck out her thumb on a sunny day in Coconut Grove. She was going to borrow $2. She was going to buy a blazer. She was going to have lunch with her dad. Instead, she got into a car. And 50 years later, we still don't know whose car it was. We still don't know where she went. We still don't know if she died that day or if she lived for years after, trapped in a hell we can't imagine. All we know is that a girl stepped into the sunlight and disappeared, and her mother was dragged into the darkness for the rest of her life. If you know something, if you were there, if you saw something, if you heard a story from an old biker or a confession from a dying man, say something. Because somewhere, maybe in the Everglades, maybe in an unmarked grave, maybe just in the memories of people who've kept silent for 50 years, Amy Billig is still waiting to be found, waiting to come home. Pensacola, Florida, August 12, 2013. If you've never been to the Florida Panhandle in August, let me set the scene for you. The air is thick, not just humid, but heavy, like you're breathing through a wet towel. The Gulf of Mexico stretches out in that particular shade of blue-green that looks beautiful in postcards, but feels endless and swallowing when you're standing on the shore. The sun beats down relentlessly, and by late afternoon, everything moves slowly. People, traffic, time itself. It's the kind of place where you go to the beach to think, to clear your head, to be alone with the sound of waves, and that's exactly where Tiffany Daniels' story ends, or begins. depending on how you look at it. Tiffany was 25 years old. She worked as a theater technician at Pensacola State College, the person behind the scenes who built the sets, hung the lights, made sure the actors had a world to perform in. She was artistic, creative, the kind of person who saw beauty in things other people overlooked. She had tattoos of plants growing from seeds on the tops of her feet, a symbol of growth, of life. Her friends described her as a free spirit, reliable but with that certain energy, the kind of person who might spontaneously decide to go for a long bike ride just to watch the sunset. She loved Pensacola's indie art scene. She fit there. But on August 12th, something was off. Her boyfriend noticed it that morning. She seemed distant, sad, maybe, not herself. When she went to work at the college that day, her supervisor noticed it too. Around 4:43 p.m., Tiffany clocked out early. She told her boss she needed a few days off to take care of things. What things? She didn't say. Her supervisor didn't press. You know how it is. Sometimes people need space. Sometimes people need a mental health day. But here's the thing. Tiffany Daniels was known for being responsible. She didn't just bail on work without a plan. She didn't go radio silent. So when she told her boss she needed time off, her boss assumed she'd be back in a few days, ready to hang the next set of lights. Tiffany went home briefly after work. Her roommate was there but didn't see her, just heard the door open and close. And then, nothing. No calls, no texts. Her phone went silent. For 8 days, no one knew where she was. Let me walk you through what we know, and more importantly, what we don't know. At 7:51 p.m. on August 12th, a toll camera on the Bob Sykes Bridge captures Tiffany's gray 1999 Toyota 4Runner heading onto Pensacola Beach. This is the last confirmed sighting of her vehicle in motion. The bridge is the only way onto the barrier island, and that timestamp locks her location. She was heading toward the beach. But here's where the timeline fractures. After 7:51 p.m., Tiffany vanishes. Her phone stops pinging towers. There are no more camera sightings, no witnesses. She doesn't call her boyfriend. She doesn't call her family. For someone who was part of a tight-knit artistic community, who had regular routines and responsibilities, this silence is deafening. Days pass. Her boyfriend starts to worry. Her family starts to worry. But remember, Tiffany had told her boss she needed time off. So for a while, people assumed she was taking that time. Maybe camping, maybe unplugging, maybe dealing with whatever was bothering her that morning. But then, the days stretched on. On August 20th, 8 days after she was last seen, someone spots her car. It's parked at Park West, a beach access parking lot on Pensacola Beach. Park West is at the far end of the island, right before you hit Fort Pickens, the national park at the tip. At night, it's isolated, dark, the kind of place where you go if you want to be alone or if you don't want to be seen. The 4Runner is just sitting there, parked, locked. When police process the vehicle, here's what they find inside. Her bicycle, her purse, her wallet with her ID and credit cards, her cell phone, a gallon jug of water, and a jar of peanut butter. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about what that car tells us, because depending on how you read it, you get completely different stories. Theory 1: suicide. The police initially leaned toward suicide. Tiffany had seemed depressed that day. She left work early. She drove to a remote beach parking lot. The Gulf of Mexico is right there, vast, unforgiving. People have walked into that water and never come back. But here's the problem with the suicide theory: the water and peanut butter. If you're planning to end your life by drowning, why pack survival supplies? A gallon of water isn't something you grab on a whim. It's heavy, bulky. It's what you bring if you're planning to be somewhere for a while. Same with the peanut butter. It's calorie-dense, shelf-stable. It's survival food. That doesn't look like a suicide kit. That looks like someone preparing for a journey or someone planning to hide out somewhere. And then there's the bicycle. If Tiffany went for a ride along the beach, which she loved to do, why was the bike still in the car? If she went for a swim, why leave all her valuables in plain sight? Her wallet, her phone. Anyone could have broken in and stolen them. The scene doesn't fit. It's too messy, too contradictory. Theory 2. Foul play. Now let's talk about the forensic evidence that changes everything. When investigators processed the 4Runner, they found 2 unidentified fingerprints on the driver's side door handle. These prints did not match Tiffany. They did not match her boyfriend, her roommate, or any of the investigators who touched the car. They were run through databases, no hits, which means someone else touched that car door. Who? There's a witness report that makes this even more unsettling. On August 19th, one day before the car was officially found, a person reported seeing a man standing near the 4Runner. He was wearing only red shorts. No shirt, no shoes, just red shorts. He was at the back of the vehicle with the tailgate up, like he was loading or unloading something. The witness also noted something odd. The car was parked facing the wrong direction against the flow of traffic, like someone had parked it in a hurry or someone who wasn't familiar with the lot. So who was the man in red shorts? Was he planting the car? Was he looting an abandoned vehicle? Or was he something worse? Here's what makes this theory chilling. Pensacola sits directly on Interstate 10. That highway is a major corridor for human trafficking moving west toward Texas and Mexico. A young woman alone at a dark beach parking lot? That's a target of opportunity. There were later sightings of Tiffany, or someone who looked like her, in Metairie, Louisiana, which is west of Pensacola on I-10. A waitress at a restaurant reported serving a woman who resembled Tiffany. The woman asked a very specific question. Is this soup made with fish broth or chicken broth? Now, why does that matter? Because Tiffany was a pescatarian. She avoided chicken but ate fish. That's not a common dietary restriction, and it's not something a random lookalike would likely ask. The sighting was never confirmed, but it's specific enough that investigators took it seriously. If Tiffany was trafficked, the fingerprints on the car could belong to the person who dumped the vehicle. The man in red shorts could have been part of it. The car could have been staged to look like a beach suicide to throw investigators off the trail. But here's the counter-argument. If someone abducted Tiffany, why leave all her valuables in the car? Why not take the purse, the phone, the wallet? Traffickers usually strip victims of identification immediately. Leaving everything behind doesn't fit the MO. Unless it was meant to look exactly like what it looked like, a woman who walked away from her life. Theory 3. Voluntary disappearance. Did Tiffany stage her own disappearance? Think about it. She told her boss she needed time off. She seemed sad, distant. Maybe she was planning something. Maybe she was overwhelmed by work, by relationships, by life, and she wanted out. She could have driven to the beach, parked the car, and met someone else, a friend, a new partner. Someone who picked her up and helped her start over somewhere else. The water and peanut butter could have been supplies for a journey. The bike could have been a red herring left behind to make it look like she went for a ride and never came back. But here's the problem. Tiffany left her wallet, her ID, her credit cards. If you're planning to disappear and start a new life, you need money. You need identification. You can't just walk into the void with nothing. And if she did walk away voluntarily, why hasn't she surfaced in over a decade? Why hasn't anyone, a friend, a coworker, a stranger, come forward and said, I saw her. She's alive. People who disappear voluntarily usually leave breadcrumbs. They slip up. They use an old email. They call family on a holiday. But Tiffany? Nothing. Just silence. Here's what haunts me about this case. The car sat in that parking lot for 8 days before anyone noticed it. 8 days. In a public parking lot on a beach that people visit constantly. How does that happen? Was it hidden? No, it was parked in the open. Was the lot empty? No, people were coming and going all week. It's like the car was invisible, like it existed in a blind spot, and when it was finally found, it wasn't by police, it wasn't by a search party, it was by a random person who happened to recognize the vehicle. For 8 days, Tiffany's entire life sat in that car, staring out at the ocean, her phone, her wallet, the tattoos on her feet that marked her as someone who believed in growth, in new beginnings, and no one saw it. Tiffany Daniels has been missing for over 11 years. Her family has never stopped searching. They've followed every lead, chased every rumor, held on to every fragment of hope. But the truth is, we don't know what happened to her. Did she walk into the Gulf of Mexico that night, weighed down by something none of us could see? Did someone take her from that parking lot? Someone who left fingerprints on her car and drove away in red shorts? Did she decide, in a moment of clarity or desperation, to walk away from her life and become someone else entirely? All three theories are possible. None of them fit perfectly. What we're left with is a gray Toyota 4Runner parked at the edge of the world. Inside, a bicycle that was never ridden, a gallon of water that was never drunk, a phone that never rang again. And somewhere, maybe in the Gulf, maybe on a highway heading west, maybe in a new life under a new name, Tiffany Daniels exists only as a question mark. She spent her life building worlds for other people, painting backdrops, hanging lights, creating the illusion of place and time for actors to inhabit. She was the person who made the story possible. But her own story? It has no third act, no resolution, no curtain call, just a car at a beach, and the ocean beyond it, keeping its secrets. Tiffany's feet bore tattoos of seeds growing into plants, a symbol of transformation, of becoming. But what did she become? And where is she now? If you know anything, if you saw something in August 2013, if you've seen her since, if you were the man in red shorts standing by that car, say something. Because a family is still waiting. A story is still unfinished. And somewhere, maybe, Tiffany is still out there, waiting to be found. Valrico, Florida, November 24th, 1997. Valrico is the kind of place people move to when they want to feel safe. It's a suburb east of Tampa, all cul-de-sacs and two-car garages and homeowners associations. The lawns are manicured, the streets are quiet. Kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. Neighbors wave to each other. Crime is something that happens somewhere else, in the city and the bad parts of town, not here. The Eisenberg family lived in a ranch-style home on a peaceful street. Steve and Marlene Eisenberg had 3 kids: William, who was 8, Monica, who was 4, and Sabrina, who was just 5 months old. 5 months. Still in that newborn phase where every sound she made was precious, where she slept in a crib in the nursery, where her entire world was her parents and her siblings and the soft glow of a nightlight. On the night of November 23, 1997, Marlene put Sabrina to bed around midnight. She checked on her one last time, the way mothers do, making sure she was breathing, making sure the blanket wasn't too high, making sure everything was perfect. And then Marlene went to bed. The house was quiet. Steve was asleep. The older kids were asleep. Even the family dog, Brownie, was settled for the night. Everything was normal. But when Marlene woke up the next morning, when she walked into the kitchen just after 6:30 a.m., she noticed something wrong. The door leading from the kitchen into the garage was open, not just unlocked, open. And when she looked into the garage, the big roll-up door, the one that opens to the street, was also wide open. Her heart started pounding. She ran to Sabrina's nursery. The crib was empty. At 6:42 a.m., Marlene Eisenberg called 911. "Someone took my baby," she screamed into the phone, and with those words, a nightmare began that would consume this family for decades. Let me walk you through what the Eisenbergs say happened. And I use the word say because from the very beginning, their account was questioned, dissected, and ultimately disbelieved by the people who were supposed to help them. On the night of November 23rd, the family had a normal evening. Dinner, baths, bedtime routines. William and Monica were put to bed in their rooms. Sabrina was placed in her crib in the nursery, a small room just off the master bedroom. Marlene says she checked on Sabrina multiple times throughout the night. The baby was fine, sleeping soundly. Around midnight, Marlene herself went to bed. Steve was already asleep. The house was locked up, or so they thought. Here's the detail that becomes crucial. Marlene admits she left the garage door open that night, not the big roll-up door. The side door that connects the garage to the kitchen. She says she was doing laundry and forgot to close it. That open door became the entry point, or at least, that's the theory. At 6:42 a.m., Marlene made the 911 call. You can listen to it online. Her voice is frantic, breaking, desperate. "My baby's missing. Someone took my baby." Police arrived within minutes. They searched the house. They searched the yard. They searched the neighborhood. Bloodhounds were brought in. Helicopters flew overhead. Volunteers combed the woods and retention ponds. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, but they wouldn't need to force entry if the garage door was open. No footprints. No fibers, no fingerprints that didn't belong to the family, and most damning of all, no witnesses. In a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors are close and windows face the street, no one saw a thing. No one heard a car. No one noticed someone carrying a baby in the middle of the night. It was as if Sabrina had simply vanished. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because within days of Sabrina's disappearance, the investigation shifted. It stopped being a search for an abductor and became an investigation of the parents. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office decided Steve and Marlene Eisenberg were lying, and they were determined to prove it. Here's the hook that made this case infamous. The police bugged the Eisenberg home. For months, investigators secretly recorded every conversation Steve and Marlene had in their kitchen, their living room, their bedroom, thousands of hours of audio. And according to the police, they hit gold. They claimed they heard Steve Eisenberg say, "The baby's dead and buried. It was the cocaine." They claimed they heard Marlene say, "We need to make sure the story stays the same." They claimed they heard both parents discussing how to hide the body, how to maintain their alibi, how to fool the police. In 1999, 2 years after Sabrina disappeared, Steve and Marlene Eisenberg were indicted by a federal grand jury. Not for murder, not for kidnapping, but for conspiracy and making false statements to law enforcement. The government's case was built almost entirely on those wiretap recordings. But here's the twist. When the case went to court, a federal judge reviewed those same tapes, and he didn't hear what the police claimed to hear. Judge Stephen Merriday wrote in his ruling that the recordings were largely inaudible and generally unintelligible. He said the transcripts prepared by law enforcement were, in many cases, pure fantasy. He accused investigators of hearing what they wanted to hear, of projecting guilt onto static and mumbling and the ambient noise of a household. The judge threw out the case. All charges were dismissed, but the damage was done. The wiretaps had been leaked to the media. The public had heard the allegations. And in the court of public opinion, Steve and Marlene Eisenberg were convicted. Let's talk about something that happens in almost every high-profile missing child case. The parents are judged not by evidence, but by behavior. Did they cry enough? Did they cry too much? Did they smile at the wrong time? Did they seem nervous? Did they seem too calm? Steve and Marlene Eisenberg failed the behavior test in the eyes of the public and the police. During a press conference, Marlene smiled. It was brief. Maybe a nervous reaction, maybe a polite instinct when cameras are pointed at you. But people saw that smile and decided it meant she wasn't grieving, that she didn't care, that she must be guilty. A neighbor, Scott Middleton, who happened to be a former cop, told reporters that when Steve came to his door the morning Sabrina disappeared to tell him what happened, he seemed too calm. No tears, no panic. But here's the thing. People in shock don't always behave the way you expect. Some people scream and wail, others go numb, others put on a brave face because they don't know what else to do. Judging someone's guilt based on whether they smiled at the wrong moment is not evidence, it's bias. Let's get into the logistics, because this is where the intruder theory starts to fall apart. Or does it? The Eisenbergs had a dog, a family pet named Brownie. And Brownie, like most dogs, barked at strangers. The theory goes like this. If an intruder entered through the open garage door, walked through the kitchen, navigated through the dark house, entered the nursery, picked up a baby, and left, wouldn't the dog have barked? And not just the Eisenbergs' dog. The neighbors had dogs too. In a quiet suburban neighborhood in the middle of the night, a barking dog would wake people up. Someone would notice, but no one heard anything. So either this intruder was extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily skilled at moving silently and keeping dogs calm. Or, and this is what investigators believed, there was no intruder. Marlene admits she left the door from the kitchen to the garage unlocked that night. She says she was doing laundry and forgot to close it. But here's the question. How did the big roll-up garage door get opened? Those doors are heavy, they're loud, They rumble and clang when they go up. If someone opened it in the middle of the night, wouldn't that wake people in the house? Wouldn't the neighbors hear it? Unless the big door was already open when the family went to bed. Unless Marlene left both doors open, the side door and the roll-up door. But she says she didn't. She says the big door was closed. So if it was closed when they went to sleep and open when they woke up, someone opened it during the night. Either an intruder from the outside or someone from the inside. I need to tell you what the government's indictment actually alleged because it's disturbing. Prosecutors didn't just claim the parents staged a kidnapping. They claimed Sabrina was neglected, possibly abused, and that she died as a result. They pointed to alleged bald spots on her head and claimed she had untreated ear infections. But Sabrina's pediatrician testified that she was a healthy baby. Medical records showed regular checkups. The bald spots were explained as normal infant hair loss from rubbing against bedding. The prosecution was building a narrative backward, starting with the conclusion that the parents were guilty and twisting every detail to fit that story. And when the tapes didn't actually contain confessions, when the medical evidence didn't support abuse, the case collapsed. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. There was a reported sighting. Years after Sabrina disappeared, a woman claimed to be her. She contacted the Eisenbergs, saying she'd been raised by another family, but had always felt something was off. She believed she might be Sabrina. DNA tests were conducted. She wasn't, but the fact that someone out there thought they might be the missing Eisenberg baby shows how much this case captured the public imagination and how desperate people were for answers. It's been over 27 years since Sabrina Eisenberg disappeared. She would be 27 years old now. If she's alive, she could be living under another name, raised by people who told her she was theirs. She could be anywhere, or she could have died that night. The truth is, we don't know. And that's what makes this case so maddening. Steve and Marlene Eisenberg were never charged with harming their daughter. The government tried and failed. A federal judge looked at the evidence and said there was none. The wiretaps were garbage. The behavior analysis was subjective. The medical claims were false. But being legally cleared doesn't erase suspicion. To this day, some people believe the Eisenbergs know what happened to Sabrina, that the open garage door was staging, that the frantic 911 call was performance. Others believe an intruder took her, that the open garage door was an invitation, that some predator saw the opportunity and took it, vanishing into the night with a 5-month-old baby. Both theories are possible. Neither has been proven. What we're left with is an empty crib. A house that was supposed to be safe. A family that was destroyed not just by loss, but by accusation. Steve and Marlene Eisenberg still live in Florida. They've never stopped searching. Every year on Sabrina's birthday, they release a statement hoping she'll see it, hoping someone, somewhere, will recognize her and come forward. Because here's the thing about babies. They're too young to remember. If someone took Sabrina and raised her as their own, she might have no idea she's missing. She might be living a normal life, completely unaware that somewhere in Florida, 2 people have spent nearly 3 decades waiting for her to come home. Or maybe she's not alive. Maybe something terrible happened that night, an accident, a tragedy, a moment of panic, and the garage door was left open to make it look like something it wasn't. We may never know. What we do know is this. On November 24th, 1997, a mother walked into her baby's room and found the crib empty. The nightmare that every parent fears had become real. And 27 years later, the nightmare hasn't ended. If you know something, if you were in Valrico that night, if you saw something, if you are Sabrina, it's not too late. Come home. Leesburg, Florida, August 27, 2006. Leesburg sits in the heart of Central Florida, about an hour northwest of Orlando. It's not a tourist destination. There are no theme parks, no beaches. It's just a working-class town of strip malls and apartment complexes surrounded by lakes and pine forests. In August, the heat is relentless, the kind of thick, humid heat that makes the air feel solid. On the night of August 27th, in a ground-floor apartment in one of those generic complexes, a 2-year-old boy named Trenton Duckett was put to bed by his mother. By 9:00 p.m., he was gone. Let me tell you about Trenton. He was just 2 years old. Sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, a toddler in the truest sense, barely verbal, completely dependent on the adults around him. He called his mother Mommy. He had a favorite blanket. He was sweet and innocent and had no idea he was at the center of a custody battle that was tearing his family apart. His mother, Melinda Duckett, was 21 years old, young, struggling. She and Trenton's father, Josh Duckett, were estranged, locked in what court documents described as a messy separation. Both sides accused the other of being unfit. Josh's family claimed Melinda was unstable. Melinda claimed Josh was dangerous. And there was another shadow hanging over this family. Josh's father, Trenton's grandfather, was James Jimmy Duckett, a former police officer who was on death row in Florida for the rape and murder of an 11-year-old girl. Think about that for a second. This child's paternal grandfather was a convicted child killer. Whether that had anything to do with what happened to Trenton, we don't know. But it adds a layer of horror to an already dark story. On the evening of August 27th, Melinda was at her apartment with Trenton. She'd put him to bed around 7 p.m. in his bedroom. And then, this is important, 2 of her male friends came over to hang out and watch a movie. The movie they chose? Saw 2. A horror film. Graphic, loud, violent. They settled in the living room. Melinda was with them. Trenton was asleep in his room down the hall. And at some point during that movie, in those hours between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., Trenton Duckett disappeared. Let's walk through what Melinda says happened, because this is one of those cases where everything hinges on her account, and whether you believe it. Around 7 p.m., Melinda put Trenton to bed. He was tired. He went down easily. She closed the door to his room and joined her friends in the living room. They started watching Saw 2. If you've never seen it, it's a brutal film. Lots of screaming, violent scenes, tension, not exactly background noise. But that's what was playing. At approximately 9 p.m., maybe a little after, Melinda went to check on Trenton. She opened the door to his room. The bed was empty. The window was open. The screen had been cut. Melinda called 911 at 9:05 p.m. You can hear the panic in her voice on the recording. "My son is missing. Someone took him through the window." Police arrived within minutes. They searched the apartment. They searched the complex. They brought in K9 units. Helicopters flew overhead with thermal imaging. They found nothing. No witnesses saw anyone carrying a child. No one heard anything unusual. No physical evidence was found outside the window. No footprints, no fibers, no signs of forced entry aside from the cut screen. And here's the detail that changed everything. When forensic investigators examined that window screen, they determined it had been cut from the inside, not from the outside, from the inside. Which means someone standing inside Trenton's room cut that screen. And if someone inside the apartment cut the screen to make it look like a break-in, that someone was almost certainly Melinda. Within days, the story went national, and it caught the attention of Nancy Grace, the former prosecutor turned TV host known for her aggressive, often combative interviewing style. On September 8th, less than 2 weeks after Trenton disappeared, Melinda appeared on Nancy Grace's show. It did not go well. Nancy Grace hammered her. She demanded to know where Melinda had been that day. She questioned why Melinda's story kept changing. She accused her, essentially, of lying. "Where were you?" Grace demanded, pounding her desk. "Why aren't you telling us where you were?" Melinda stumbled through her answers. She seemed evasive, defensive, and to millions of viewers watching at home, she looked guilty. The interview ended. Melinda went home. The next day, September 9th, 2006, Melinda Duckett drove to her grandparents' home, went into a bedroom, and shot herself in the chest. She left a suicide note. In it, she professed her love for Trenton. She said she missed him. She expressed anger at the media, at the accusations, at being judged by people who didn't know her. But she didn't say where Trenton was. She didn't confess. She didn't provide a location. She didn't explain what happened. She just ended her life, taking whatever truth she knew with her. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because Melinda's suicide created 2 camps, 2 completely opposing interpretations of what happened. To law enforcement and many in the public, Melinda's suicide was proof of guilt. They called it consciousness of guilt. The logic goes like this: if you're innocent, you don't kill yourself. You fight, you demand answers, you search for your child. But if you're guilty, if you know your child is dead because you killed him, the walls closing in become unbearable. The accusations, the scrutiny, the knowledge that the truth will eventually come out, it's too much. So you take the only escape you see. The cut screen supports this theory. If it was cut from the inside, Melinda staged the scene. She made it look like an abduction to cover up something else, an accident, a moment of rage, something that happened while she was supposed to be watching him. And the timeline fits. She had a 2-hour window while her friends were watching Saw 2. The movie was loud. The friends were distracted. If something happened to Trenton during that time, if he woke up, if there was an accident, if she lost her temper, she could have staged the scene, disposed of his body, and then discovered him missing. But here's the problem with that theory. Where's the body? Leesburg is surrounded by lakes, swamps, and dense forest. If Melinda disposed of Trenton's body during that 2-hour window, investigators should have found some trace of it. Cadaver dogs were used. Massive searches were conducted. Nothing. And there's another problem. The friends. If Melinda did something to Trenton while they were in the apartment, they heard nothing? They noticed nothing off about her behavior when she came back into the room? It's possible. People can be oblivious, especially if they're engrossed in a movie, but it's a tight timeline and a massive risk. There's another theory, one that's darker in a different way. It suggests Melinda didn't kill Trenton, she hid him. Here's how it works. Melinda was terrified of Josh Duckett, maybe because of his family history, maybe because of things that happened during their relationship. She believed, rightly or wrongly, that Trenton was in danger if Josh got custody. So she made a desperate decision. She gave Trenton to someone she trusted, a friend, a family member, someone in what's sometimes called an underground railroad for parents fleeing custody disputes. She staged the abduction to cover the handoff, and when the media and police accused her of murder, when Nancy Grace tore her apart on national television, she couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't admit what she'd done without exposing the people hiding Trenton. So she took her own life, believing Trenton was safe somewhere, hidden from his father. It's a tragic, almost romantic theory. A mother making the ultimate sacrifice to protect her child. But here's the problem. It's been 18 years. If Trenton is alive, he's 20 years old now. Old enough to know who he is, old enough to access the internet, to see his own face on missing persons' websites, to question the story he was told about his childhood. Why hasn't he come forward? Unless he was told his mother is dead and his father is dangerous, and he's been conditioned to stay hidden, or unless he was adopted into a family that has no idea who he really is, or unless the theory is wrong and Trenton isn't alive. Let's go back to the cut screen, because this is the piece of evidence everyone fixates on. Forensic analysis said it was cut from the inside, but what does that actually mean? It means the angle of the cut, the direction of the fibers, suggests the knife or blade moved from inside the room outward. If you're a kidnapper standing outside, you can't cut a screen that way. You'd be cutting from outside in. So if the screen was cut from the inside, it points to staging. But here's the counter-argument. Could the forensics be wrong? Could the cut have been made from the outside, but at an odd angle that made it look like it came from the inside? Screen material is flimsy. The analysis is not an exact science, and if you are staging a crime scene, why cut the screen at all? Why not just say the door was unlocked and someone walked in? Cutting a screen is loud. It's noticeable. It's a detail that invites forensic scrutiny. Unless you're panicking, unless you're not thinking clearly, unless you're a 21-year-old with no experience in crime trying to make something look convincing and getting it wrong. Melinda's suicide note is the most haunting piece of this case, because it doesn't give answers. She wrote that she loved Trenton, that she missed him, that she was angry at the media and the accusations, but she didn't say, "I'm sorry, I hurt him. Here's where he is." If guilt drove her to suicide, why not confess? Why not give the family closure? Why not at least point investigators in a direction? Some say it's because she was protecting someone. Others say it's because she knew confessing wouldn't bring Trenton back and would only destroy her memory further. But the absence of a confession in that note is significant. It leaves the door open, just a crack, to the possibility that she didn't know where he was, that someone else took him, that the cut screen was real, not staged, or maybe she just couldn't bring herself to write the words. It's been 18 years since Trenton Duckett disappeared. He would be 20 years old now, old enough to vote, old enough to have a life, a job, maybe even a family of his own, if he's alive. But most people don't think he is. The prevailing theory, the one law enforcement leans toward, is that Melinda Duckett killed her son, either intentionally or accidentally, and staged the abduction to cover it up. When the pressure became too much, when she realized she couldn't maintain the lie, she ended her life rather than face the consequences. It's a tidy theory. It fits most of the evidence, the cut screen, the tight timeline, the suicide. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain where Trenton's body is. It doesn't explain why Melinda didn't confess in her note. And it doesn't account for the possibility, however slim, that she was telling the truth. What haunts me about this case is the silence. Melinda is gone. Trenton is gone. And the only person who could tell us what really happened chose death over explanation. Was it guilt? Was it grief? Was it desperation? Was it the weight of a secret she couldn't bear but also couldn't reveal? We'll never know. What we're left with is a cut window screen, a loud horror movie playing in the next room, a 2-year-old boy who vanished without a trace, and a mother who just days later pulled a trigger and took the truth with her. Nancy Grace faced backlash after Melinda's suicide. Critics accused her of driving a vulnerable young woman to her death with her aggressive questioning. Grace defended herself, saying she was just doing her job, asking the hard questions that needed to be asked. But the damage was done, and whether Melinda was guilty or innocent, the fact remains, she's dead. And Trenton is still missing. If Trenton is out there somewhere, if he's alive, living under another name, raised by people who love him, I hope one day he finds out who he is. I hope he sees his face on a missing persons website and recognizes himself. I hope he comes forward. But if he's not out there, if something terrible happened that August night in 2006, then I hope someday someone finds him, brings him home, gives his family the closure they have been searching for. Because right now, all we have is a mystery, a tragedy, and a silence that's lasted nearly 2 decades. Trenton Duckett deserves better than that. And so does the truth. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, June 19, 2012. Fort Lauderdale isn't just any coastal city. It's known as the yachting capital of the world. Mega yachts line the intracoastal waterway like floating mansions. The wealthy dock their boats behind their waterfront estates and treat the Atlantic Ocean like their personal playground. But the ocean doesn't care how much money you have. And on the night of June 19, 2012, the Atlantic was angry. A small craft advisory was in effect. Winds were gusting at 20 knots. The seas were choppy, 4 to 5 foot swells, maybe higher farther offshore. This was not a night for a leisurely cruise. This was a night when experienced boaters stay tied to the dock, pour a drink, and wait for better weather. But Guma Aguiar didn't wait. Let me tell you about Guma. He was 35 years old. A self-made energy tycoon worth over $100 million, he'd co-founded an oil and gas company that made him rich beyond imagination. He was a major philanthropist, particularly in the Jewish community, donating millions to Israeli causes. He had a wife, Jamie, 4 young children, a waterfront mansion in Rio Vista, one of Fort Lauderdale's most exclusive neighborhoods. From the outside, his life looked like a dream. But on the inside, Guma Aguiar was unraveling. He suffered from severe bipolar disorder. In the months leading up to June 2012, his behavior had become increasingly erratic. He'd been involuntarily committed to psychiatric facilities more than once. He was convinced people were following him, that snipers were watching his house. He believed he had a messianic destiny tied to Israel. He'd named his boat the TT, Zion, a 31-foot Jupiter center console, because of his obsession with Zionism. And he was in the middle of a brutal legal war. His mother and his uncle, billionaire Thomas Kaplan, were suing him, trying to wrest control of his fortune. They claimed he was mentally unfit to manage his own money. The lawsuits were ugly, public, and deeply personal. Guma's marriage was crumbling. His mind was fracturing. And on that stormy night in June, he walked out of his house, got onto his boat, and sailed into the dark. Alone. Let's walk through what we know. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on June 19th, home security cameras capture Guma pacing on his back patio. He's barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt and black shorts. He looks agitated, restless. The footage shows a man who can't sit still, who's arguing with something, maybe himself, maybe voices only he can hear. Around 7:30 p.m., Guma boards the TT Zion. The boat is docked behind his house, accessible directly from his backyard. He doesn't tell anyone where he's going. He doesn't file a float plan. He just unties the lines and motors out into the intracoastal, heading toward the Atlantic. The boat is equipped with GPS tracking. Investigators would later pull the data, and here's what it shows. Guma heads east, directly offshore, not cruising along the coast, not heading to a marina. He's going out into the open ocean, and he's going fast. The GPS track shows him speeding offshore for about 24 minutes, and then, at approximately 7:54 p.m., something happens. The boat makes a sharp, erratic turn. The speed drops. The engines throttle down. The GPS shows a looping, drifting pattern, the kind of movement you see when a boat has lost steerage, when no one is at the helm. And then, hours later, the boat comes back. At 1:15 a.m. on June 20th, nearly 6 hours after Guma departed, the TT Zion washes ashore on Fort Lauderdale Beach, right in front of the Elbow Room, a famous beachfront bar. And this is where the story becomes truly eerie. The boat is found beached on the sand. The navigation lights are on, red and green running lights, white stern light, all glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The engines are running. Not at full throttle, but idling, still churning, still burning fuel. On the center console, police find Guma's wallet, his cell phone, both sitting there, untouched like he just stepped away for a moment. And on the deck, they find his gray t-shirt, his flip-flops, but Guma Aguiar is gone. Now, this is where it gets strange, because depending on how you interpret the evidence, you get three completely different stories. Theory 1. Accidental man overboard. The ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. 4 to 5 foot seas might not sound massive, but in a 31-foot center console, an open boat with no cabin, no railings, those waves are serious. If you hit one wrong, if you're standing when you should be sitting, you can get launched overboard. Guma was going fast. The GPS data shows that. If he hit a wave at the wrong angle, the boat could have lurched violently. He could have been thrown into the water before he even knew what was happening. Once you're in the Atlantic at night, in rough seas, your chances of survival drop fast. Even if you're a strong swimmer, even if you're not injured, the cold and the waves and the darkness conspire against you. Without a life jacket, and there's no evidence Guma was wearing one, he could have drowned within minutes. The shirt and flip-flops on the deck support this. Maybe he took them off to get better traction on the wet deck. Maybe he was trying to adjust something, leaning over the gunwale, and a wave hit him. It's the simplest explanation. But here's the problem. Guma was an experienced boater. He'd owned boats for years. He knew the ocean. And any experienced boater knows you don't go full throttle into a storm. You don't go offshore alone at night in rough seas unless you have a very good reason, or unless you've stopped caring about the risks. And there's another detail that bothers me. Modern boats like the TT Zion are equipped with a kill switch, a lanyard that attaches to the captain. If you fall overboard, the lanyard pulls out and the engines shut off automatically. It's a basic safety feature, but the engines on the TT Zion were still running when the boat was found, which means either Guma wasn't wearing the kill switch lanyard, or it malfunctioned, or it was deliberately disconnected. Why would you disconnect your kill switch before heading into a storm? Theory 2. The staged disappearance. Let's talk about motive. Guma was being sued by his own family, his mother, his uncle. People he'd trusted were trying to take his money, claiming he was incompetent. His marriage was falling apart. His mental health was in free fall. The walls were closing in, and he had $100 million. If you wanted to escape your life, If you wanted to vanish and start over, faking your death at sea is one of the oldest tricks in the book. The ocean is vast. Bodies don't always wash up. If you stage it right, you can disappear forever. Here's how it could work. Guma motors offshore. He meets a second vessel, maybe a friend, maybe someone he paid. He transfers to the other boat, taking nothing with him but the clothes on his back. He leaves his wallet, his phone, his shirt, and flip-flops on the TT Zion to make it look like he fell overboard. He sets the boat on a course back toward shore, maybe using the autopilot or just pointing it in the right direction and letting the waves push it. And then he sails away to a new life. The evidence fits, doesn't it? The neatly placed wallet and phone, the missing clothing, the fact that no body was ever found despite extensive Coast Guard searches. But here's the thing. If you're staging a disappearance, you want to be invisible. You want the boat to drift out to sea and never be found, or sink or wash up weeks later in pieces. You don't want it to beach itself in front of a popular bar with the lights on and the engines running at 1:15 a.m. That's theatrical. That's attention-grabbing. And there's another problem. Guma's obsession with Israel. If he was staging his death to start over, the popular theory is he fled to Israel. But Israel has rigorous border controls. You can't just walk in under a fake identity. And Guma left his wallet, his ID, his credit cards, his cash on the boat. How do you cross international borders with no identification? The staged disappearance theory has appeal, but the logistics don't quite work. Theory 3. The Messianic Mission. Now let's talk about Guma's mental state. In the months before he disappeared, Guma had told people he believed he was the Messiah, or at least a key figure in a biblical prophecy. He was obsessed with Israel, with Zionism, with destiny. He believed he had a divine purpose. What if that night, in the grip of a manic episode, he decided to fulfill that purpose? What if he sailed out into the storm, believing the ocean would part for him, or that he'd be taken up into the heavens, or that he'd somehow reach Israel by sheer force of will? Bipolar disorder, especially in its manic phases, can produce delusions of grandeur so powerful that reality becomes negotiable. People in manic states have done impossible things, or tried to, because they genuinely believed the laws of physics didn't apply to them. The shirt and flip-flops could have been part of a ritual, a shedding of earthly possessions before a spiritual transformation. The wallet and phone left behind because where he was going, he wouldn't need them. And the boat, set adrift, returning to shore like a ghost ship, could have been the universe's way of marking the spot where Guma Agyar crossed over, from this world into whatever lay beyond. It's the most tragic interpretation. But given his documented delusions, it's also disturbingly plausible. There's one more detail that conspiracy theorists love: the GPS data. When investigators pulled the onboard electronics, they found that some of the GPS tracking data was corrupted or missing. The timeline has gaps. Some of the video files from onboard cameras, if the boat had any, were also incomplete or damaged. Was that just a technical glitch? Saltwater and electronics don't mix well, or was it deliberate tampering? Did someone erase evidence of a second vessel, evidence of foul play? We don't know, and we probably never will. The Coast Guard searched for Guma Agyar for days. Helicopters swept the coastline. Boats combed the waters offshore. Divers checked the reefs. They found nothing. No body, no debris, no life jacket floating in the current. In 2015, 3 years after he vanished, Guma Agyar was declared legally dead. His estate was settled. His children grew up without a father. His wife moved on, but the mystery never closed. Because here's what haunts me about this case: the ghost boat. Picture it. It's 1:15 in the morning, the beach is dark and empty. And out of the Atlantic comes this boat, engines rumbling, lights glowing, heading straight for the shore like it knows exactly where it's going. It beaches itself in the sand. The engines keep running, the lights keep shining. But there's no one at the wheel, no captain, no crew. Just a wallet and a phone and a pair of flip-flops sitting on the deck, waiting for someone who will never come back. What happened to Guma Agyar in those hours between 7:54 p.m. and 1:15 a.m.? Did he drown Pulled under by waves and madness, his body carried out to sea by the current, did he stage the perfect escape, sailing off to a new life under a new name? Or did he sail into the storm believing he was heading toward something greater, something divine, only to be swallowed by the indifferent ocean? All three are possible. None can be proven. What we're left with is a boat that came home without its captain, a fortune left behind, a family shattered, and somewhere in the Atlantic maybe the answer. Guma Aguiar had everything: money, power, influence. But in the end, all of it fit neatly on the deck of a 31-foot boat: a wallet, a phone, a shirt, and a pair of flip-flops. Everything else, the man, the truth, the reason, was taken by the sea. And the sea doesn't give up its secrets. Clearwater, Florida. September 11th, 2000. Let me set the scene for you. It's 4:00 in the morning. The world is dark and quiet. Most people are asleep, deep in that stage of rest where you're dead to the world. The only people awake at 4 a.m. are insomniacs, shift workers, and people who shouldn't be awake. Clearwater is a beach town on Florida's Gulf Coast, famous for its white sand and tourist attractions. But the Savannah Trace apartment complex where this story takes place isn't part of that postcard version of Florida. It's inland, away from the beach. It's a sprawling complex of identical buildings filled with working-class families, transient residents, and people just trying to get by. In one of those apartments lived Leah Hackett and her 8-year-old son, Zachary Bernhardt. Zachary was a sweet kid, blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that lit up a room. He had scars, one on the bridge of his nose, one on his chin, little imperfections that made him uniquely identifiable. He was in 3rd grade. He liked video games and riding his bike. He was just a normal 8-year-old living a normal life, until the early morning of September 11th, 2000, when he vanished. And I don't mean he wandered off. I don't mean he ran away. I mean he was there one moment, sleeping safely in his bed, and gone the next. Erased. Let me tell you what Leah Hackett says happened. And I say says because her account has been questioned, dissected, and debated for over 2 decades. According to Leah, she couldn't sleep that night. Insomnia. She was restless, anxious, couldn't settle. So around 4 a.m. she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She decided to go for a walk. And not just a walk. She decided to go for a swim in the apartment complex pool. Alone. In the dark. At 4 in the morning, she left Zachary asleep in her bed. And, this is crucial, she left the apartment door unlocked so she could get back in. Let's walk through the timeline, because this case hinges entirely on a razor-thin window of opportunity. 3. 4 a.m. Leah is awake, restless. Zachary is asleep in her bed. She makes the decision to leave the apartment. 4 a.m. Leah exits the apartment. She does not lock the door. She walks to the pool area, which is maybe 100 yards away from her unit. She goes for a swim, alone, in the dark. Now, let me pause here. A 4 a.m. swim. In Florida, even in September, the nights are warm and humid, so the temperature isn't the issue, but the time is. Who goes swimming at 4 a.m.? Insomnia is real. I'm not disputing that. But choosing to leave your 8-year-old alone in an unlocked apartment to go for a swim is a specific kind of decision. It's a risk. 4:20 a.m. Leah returns to the apartment. The exact timing is a bit fuzzy in the reports, but she claims she was gone for about 15 to 20 minutes. She walks back, dripping wet, because here's another detail. She didn't bring a towel. She returns to the apartment, opens the door, goes to the bedroom. The bed is empty. Zachary is gone. Leah searches the apartment. She checks the bathroom, the closets, under the bed. She runs outside, calling his name. She's panicking now, screaming for help. Neighbors wake up, doors open, people come out in their pajamas, confused, alarmed. 4:47 a.m. Leah calls 911. You can hear it in her voice, the terror, the disbelief. My son is missing. I left for just a few minutes and now he's gone. On the call, she admits it. I guess it was unlocked. Yes, it's my fault. By sunrise, Clearwater police had flooded the complex. K-9 units, helicopters, dive teams searched nearby ponds and retention basins. The FBI got involved. Zachary's face was plastered on every TV screen in the Tampa Bay area, but there were no leads, no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry because the door was already unlocked. Zachary Bernhardt had simply vanished. Now, this is where it gets strange, because depending on how you interpret the facts, you get two completely different stories. Let's say Leah is telling the truth. She went for a walk and a swim. She was gone for 15, maybe 20 minutes. During that window, someone entered the apartment and took Zachary. But think about the logistics. This means that in the middle of the night, a predator, either a stranger or someone who'd been watching the apartment, saw Leah leave. They waited just long enough to be sure she wasn't coming right back. Then, they entered the unlocked apartment, went into the bedroom, woke up or grabbed a sleeping 8-year-old boy, and left. All in less than 20 minutes, and Zachary didn't scream. He didn't fight. He didn't make a sound loud enough to wake the neighbors in the surrounding apartments. That requires a level of speed, stealth, and luck that borders on the impossible. Unless Zachary knew the person, unless the person who took him was someone he trusted, someone he'd go with quietly. Which brings us to the neighbors. Savannah Trace was a large complex, hundreds of units. People were constantly moving in and out, renters, transients, people who stayed a few months and left. It was the kind of place where you didn't necessarily know your neighbors, where someone could be watching you and you'd never notice. There were reports, months after Zachary disappeared, that raised alarm bells. In late 2001, over a year after Zachary vanished, a man in a truck tried to lure 3 young boys in the same apartment complex with offers of ice cream. He was scared off before anything happened, but the incident proved that predators were active in that area. Was Zachary taken by someone like that? Someone who'd been watching, waiting for an opportunity? It's possible. But here's the problem. There's no evidence. No one saw a car leave. No one heard a child crying or calling for help. No physical evidence was found in the apartment. No fingerprints, no fibers, nothing. Now let's talk about the theory that law enforcement heavily favored. Leah Hackett did something to Zachary and staged the disappearance to cover it up. The logic goes like this. The 4:00 a.m. swim is an alibi. It's a story designed to give Leah a window where she was away while the crime occurred. In reality, something happened to Zachary earlier in the night, an accident, a moment of rage, something, and Leah used the pre-dawn hours to dispose of his body. And here's the detail that fuels this theory. Neighbors reported seeing Leah's car move during the night. If Leah was walking to the pool, why was her car moving? Was she driving somewhere? Was she transporting something or someone? Leah has denied this. She's maintained for over 20 years that she never moved her car that night. She says the neighbors are mistaken or they saw someone else's car. But the suspicion stuck. Police also noted inconsistencies in her behavior. The towelless swim. The decision to leave an 8-year-old alone in an unlocked apartment at Fort Guam. The fact that she failed multiple polygraph tests, though polygraphs, it should be noted, are not admissible in court for a reason. They're unreliable. Still, investigators made it clear. They believe Leah knows more than she's saying. But here's the counter-argument. Where's the evidence? Cadaver dogs were brought in. They searched the apartment. They searched Leah's car. They found nothing. No trace of decomposition. No blood. No signs of a struggle. If Leah killed Zachary and disposed of his body, she did it so cleanly that modern forensics couldn't find a single trace. And she did it in a matter of hours, in the dark, while living in an apartment complex surrounded by people. That's not impossible, but it's extraordinarily difficult. Let's focus on this for a moment, because it's the hinge upon which the entire case swings. Leah admits she left the door unlocked. Her reasoning: she didn't have her key with her and needed to be able to get back inside. In 2000 in Florida, in an apartment complex, leaving your door unlocked at 4 a.m. is a risk. It's an invitation. Not intentionally, but functionally. If a predator was prowling the complex, testing doors, looking for opportunities, an unlocked door is a jackpot. But here's the thing. If someone randomly tried the door and found it unlocked, they'd have no way of knowing an 8-year-old boy was inside. They'd have to enter, explore, and stumble upon Zachary by chance. That's a huge risk for a predator to take. Most opportunistic criminals don't walk into occupied apartments in the middle of the night. Too much can go wrong. Someone wakes up, you get caught, the whole plan falls apart. Unless they knew. Unless this wasn't random. Unless someone had been watching and knew Leah's habits. Knew she sometimes went for walks at odd hours. Knew Zachary would be alone. That elevates this from random crime to premeditated stalking. There's one more detail I need to mention, and it's grimly ironic. Zachary disappeared on September 11th, 2000, exactly 1 year before the terrorist attacks that would dominate every news cycle in America. When Zachary vanished, his story made local headlines. There was coverage, there were searches, there was attention. But 1 year later, on the anniversary of his disappearance, the family planned a vigil to keep his case in the public eye. That vigil was September 11th, 2001. The same day the Twin Towers fell. Zachary's case was buried. The media attention evaporated. The story was swallowed by the national tragedy. And in many ways, Zachary Bernhardt became a forgotten child, one of thousands of missing kids whose faces fade from the news when the next big story breaks. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the cruel reality of timing. But it meant that leads dried up. Tips stopped coming in. The case went cold. It's been over 24 years since Zachary Bernhardt disappeared. He would be 32 years old now, a grown man, maybe with a family of his own if he's alive. But most people don't think he is. The prevailing theory, the one law enforcement leans toward, is that Leah Hackett knows what happened to her son. Whether it was an accident or something darker, they believe she used the early morning hours to cover it up and has maintained her innocence ever since. But Leah has never confessed. She's never wavered from her story. And without evidence, without a body, without a confession, there's nothing to charge her with. So the case sits, open, unsolved, a question mark. And here's what haunts me. If Leah is telling the truth, then a predator walked into that apartment in a 15-minute window, took an 8-year-old boy, and vanished without a trace. That means Zachary was targeted, watched, hunted, but if Leah is lying, then a mother has carried the secret of what happened to her son for nearly a quarter of a century. She's lived with the guilt, the suspicion, the stares, and has never broken. Both scenarios are chilling. What we're left with is an empty bed, an unlocked door, a mother who went for a swim in the dark, and a boy who was there one moment and gone the next. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. That's physics. So where did Zachary Bernhardt go? If someone took him, where did they take him? If something happened in that apartment, where is he now? Those questions have haunted Clearwater for 24 years, and unless someone talks, unless Leah breaks her silence or a witness finally comes forward or someone stumbles upon evidence that's been hidden all this time, those questions may never be answered. Zachary Bernhardt deserves better than to be a cold case file. He deserves to be found. He deserves answers. And somewhere, whether it's in a memory, a secret, or a place no one has thought to look, those answers exist, waiting. Jacksonville, Florida, February 10th, 2005. Jacksonville is massive. It's the largest city by land area in the contiguous United States. Over 800 square miles of sprawling suburbs, industrial zones, strip malls, and forgotten corners where things and people can disappear without a trace. On a Thursday afternoon in February 2005, 2 boys walked out of Paxson Middle School and vanished into that vastness. Their names were Mark Degner and Brian Hayes. Mark was 12 years old. Brian was 13. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. Because while their bodies were those of preteens, their minds were much younger. Both boys were special needs students. Mark had developmental delays. Brian had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and lived in a group home called Daniel House, a residential facility for children with emotional and behavioral challenges. When I say they were vulnerable, I mean it in the most literal sense. They didn't have the cognitive tools to navigate danger. They didn't have the street smarts to recognize predators. They didn't have the survival skills to last on their own. But they had each other. Mark and Brian were best friends, inseparable. They sat together at lunch, they walked the halls together, they looked out for each other in the way that kids who feel different from everyone else tend to do. They formed their own little unit of two against a world that often didn't understand them. Mark had brown hair and hazel eyes. He was white, about average height for his age, and he had a thick southern drawl that made him instantly recognizable if you heard him speak. Brian had red hair and brown eyes, bright red hair, the kind that stands out in a crowd. He had a scar on the left side of his torso, and like Mark, he was described as being mentally younger than his age, which is a clinical way of saying he was innocent, trusting, easy to manipulate. On February 10th, 2005, these two boys were in class at Paxson Middle School. It was an ordinary day, until it wasn't. Let me walk you through what happened, because the details matter, and the failures matter even more. It's around 1:30 p.m. Afternoon classes are in session. Mark and Brian are in their special education classroom. Something happens. Reports vary, but the general consensus is that one of the boys gets upset. Maybe they were frustrated by an assignment. Maybe there was a conflict with another student. Whatever triggered it, they decided they were done. And here's the critical detail. They didn't just storm out impulsively. They executed a plan. According to witnesses, one of the boys created a distraction in the classroom, acting out, making noise, drawing the teacher's attention. While the teacher was dealing with that, the other boy slipped out of the room. It was coordinated, deliberate. They met up in the hallway, ran to an exit, and bolted out of the school building. Multiple students saw them leave. They ran across the school grounds, past the baseball fields, and toward the street. This happened in broad daylight, around 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon, in front of witnesses, and then they were gone. Now, this is where it gets strange, because the response to their disappearance was catastrophically slow. The school didn't immediately call the police. There was confusion about whether they just wandered off campus for a bit, or if this was a serious situation. By the time Mark's mother was notified, when he didn't get off the bus that afternoon, hours had passed. And here's the kicker. Brian's mother wasn't notified until the next day. The next day. Because Brian was a ward of the state, living in a group home, and the communication chain between the school and Daniel House was apparently broken or delayed. So by the time the police were fully mobilized, by the time search teams were organized, by the time anyone was looking for these boys with urgency, it was too late. The trail was cold. Here's where the system failed Mark and Brian in the worst possible way. When police were finally notified, they classified the boys as runaways, not abducted, not missing under suspicious circumstances, runaways. And that label is poison, because if kids are runaways, the assumption is they left voluntarily. They're out there somewhere by choice. They'll come home when they're ready. There's no immediate danger, which means no Amber Alert, no urgent press conferences, no saturation media coverage, just 2 names added to a list of missing kids filed away, waiting for them to turn up. But here's the thing. Mark and Brian were not capable of being successful runaways. Let's use logic. These were boys with the cognitive development of much younger children. They had no money, no food, no plan. They were impulsive, yes, but they weren't criminal masterminds. They weren't street-smart teenagers who knew how to hop trains or find shelters or scam meals. They were 2 scared, confused kids who ran out of a school building because they were upset about something. How long do kids like that survive on the streets of Jacksonville on their own? A day, maybe 2? Someone should have found them. A gas station clerk, a homeless outreach worker, a concerned citizen who saw 2 young boys wandering around looking lost. But no one did. Now, this is where the case fractures into competing theories, because what happened after Mark and Brian ran out of that school is a complete mystery. Theory 1. They got lost and died. The most innocent explanation is that the boys got disoriented, wandered into a dangerous area, maybe near the railroad tracks, maybe near the St. Johns River, and succumbed to the elements or an accident. Jacksonville has industrial zones, abandoned buildings, wooded areas, places where 2 kids could get hurt and their bodies could go undiscovered. But here's the problem. There have been massive searches over the years. Volunteers, cadaver dogs, sonar scans of waterways, nothing. You'd expect that if 2 boys died of exposure or drowned, eventually someone would find remains. Clothing, a backpack, shoes, something. But in 20 years, nothing has surfaced. Theory 2. They were taken. This is the theory that law enforcement eventually came around to, and it's the one that makes the most sense, even though it's the darkest. Here's the scenario. Mark and Brian run out of the school. They're upset, they're not thinking clearly. They start walking down the road, maybe toward Mark's house, maybe just away from the school. A car pulls up. The driver's friendly, sympathetic. "You boys okay? You need a ride?" And because Mark and Brian are trusting, because they don't have the cognitive tools to recognize danger, they get in the car. This is called a compliant abduction. The victims go willingly because they don't realize they're being victimized. It's rare for 2 children to be abducted at once. Predators usually target lone victims. Less risk, easier to control. But if a predator saw 2 confused, vulnerable boys walking alone in the middle of the day, they might have seen it as a golden opportunity. 2 victims who won't resist, who will believe whatever story you tell them, who can be isolated, controlled, and silenced. And here's the detail that supports this theory. There were reports, vague, unconfirmed reports, of Mark and Brian being seen getting into a gray car shortly after they left the school. But those reports were never fully investigated. By the time police took the case seriously, the witnesses' memories had faded. The details were too fuzzy to be actionable. Let's talk about why Mark and Brian were such high-risk victims. Brian lived in a group home. That means he was already part of a system that, statistically, fails to protect children at a higher rate than biological families. Kids in group homes are more likely to run away, more likely to be exploited, more likely to fall through the cracks. Mark, meanwhile, was in special education and came from a family that, while loving, was dealing with the challenges of raising a child with developmental delays. These boys didn't have the safety net that other kids might have. They didn't have parents checking in on them constantly. They didn't have the social skills to seek help from adults they didn't know. They were invisible, forgettable. The kind of kids society overlooks, and predators know that. They target the vulnerable, the ones no one is watching closely, the ones who won't be missed right away. Years after the boys disappeared, police received a disturbing tip. Someone claimed that Mark and Brian were buried in a specific location, a wooded area near Jacksonville. The tip was specific enough that investigators took it seriously. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs. They dug. They found nothing. Was the tip a hoax? Was the location wrong? Or were the boys never buried at all? Perhaps their remains disposed of in water, or burned, or hidden in a place no one has thought to look. We don't know. Here's what keeps me up at night about this case: the total absence of evidence. Mark had red hair, bright, unmistakable red hair. Mark had a thick Southern accent. They were 2 kids traveling together, which is memorable. In a city of nearly 1 million people, how do 2 boys vanish without a single credible sighting after the day they disappeared? They didn't have money to buy bus tickets. They didn't have fake IDs. They didn't have a network of friends or relatives hiding them. So either they died very quickly, within hours or days of leaving that school, or someone took them and kept them hidden. And if someone took them, what happened next? Were they trafficked, held captive, killed and disposed of? Every possibility is a nightmare. It's been 20 years since Mark Degner and Brian Hayes walked out of Paxson Middle School. They would be 32 and 33 years old now. Men, maybe with families of their own, careers, lives, if they're alive. But the hard truth, the truth that law enforcement and the families have had to accept, is that they are almost certainly not. 2 developmentally delayed children don't survive on the streets for 2 decades. They don't create new identities and start over. They don't simply forget who they are and where they came from. If Mark and Brian are alive, someone has been holding them, controlling them, keeping them silent. And if they're not alive, someone knows where they are. Someone knows what happened that February afternoon when 2 boys got into a car or walked into the wrong place at the wrong time and never came home. The families have never stopped searching. Mark's mother still posts on social media, still shares age progression photos showing what Mark might look like today. Brian's caseworkers and advocates have never given up hope. But hope is a fragile thing after 20 years. What haunts me most about this case is how easily it happened, how a school system failed to immediately report 2 vulnerable children missing, how police labeled them runaways when they were clearly victims, how the crucial first hours, the golden window when witnesses remember details, when trails are fresh, were wasted. By the time anyone was really looking for Mark Degner and Brian Hayes, they'd already been swallowed by the sprawl of Jacksonville. And in a city of 800 square miles, you can hide almost anything. If you know something, if you saw 2 boys that day, if you heard rumors, if you gave them a ride, if you know where they are, it's not too late to speak. Because somewhere, 2 families are still waiting, still hoping that one day the phone will ring, the door will open, and 2 boys, now men, will finally come home. But after 20 years of silence, that hope feels more like a prayer. Mark Degner and Brian Hayes walked out of a school door in broad daylight in front of witnesses and stepped off the edge of the earth, and no one knows where they landed.